Hello, everybody. Welcome into Hoover, Alabama. I'm just outside the hotel where SEC Media Days is taking place. My name is Brandon Adams, and this is SEC Country Live. We come to you every Wednesday afternoon at 3 p.m. Eastern Time. We're back here in our customary spot once again to try to react to everything that's been going on over the course of these last couple of days with SEC Media Days. We'll give you some of the sights and sounds from Hoover, Alabama over the course of our time together over the next few minutes here. A lot of this is going to include your comments today there as well on both Facebook and YouTube, your chance to react to what your team has said this week, the coach, the players for those teams. Right now in the hotel behind me in the big rooms, it is Texas A&M coach Jimbo Fisher and the Aggies players obviously facing questions about their status as SEC West contenders. Earlier today, Nick Saban obviously paid a compliment to his former protege and offensive coordinator Jimbo Fisher, saying that he absolutely believes the Aggies are as much of a threat and a competitor in the SEC West as anyone could be. That is just some of what Nick Saban had to say earlier today. But it's actually what Saban said on Tuesday that has probably generated as much buzz as anything here at SEC Media Days here this week. I'll show you the tweet on the screen. Chris Hummer from 24/7 Sports talking about Nick Saban being at an event in Texas, talking about his quarterback, Bryce Young, who's about to make his debut as the starting quarterback for Alabama. At least that's our presumption here for this upcoming year. And as you'll see on your screen, one of the things that Nick Saban said is that he thinks that it's been amazing how well Bryce Young has taken to the new name, image, likeness era that's now in college football, calling it an ungodly sum of money that Bryce Young's on his way to earning, approaching 7 figures, Nick Saban says, but it's Alabama quarterback, which has left a lot of people here around Hoover, Alabama, that's to say, wow, can you believe Bryce Young is making so much money on name, image, likeness? And to me, that's not a rhetorical question. The answer to that question is no, I don't believe that. I find that claim to be pretty specious all the way around. I know what you're going to say. It sounds like I'm being a hater, either hating on Young, getting a chance to make himself some money, hating on Nick Saban, Alabama, once again, seemingly finding a way to get over on the rest of SEC and college football. But these are one of those kinds of statements that ought to matter, and it shouldn't be just treated uncritically and without any skepticism whatsoever, just because that kind of figure, 7-figure amount of money for name, image, likeness, looks good in a headline. This is one of those things that ought to be vetted and ought to be checked. And the reason why I take this seriously is because obviously we know why Nick Saban at an event would bring up Bryce Young making that kind of money. It's because of the recruiting. Obviously, he likes the idea of putting it out there that if you come to Alabama, you're going to make far more money off your name, image, and likeness than we've thus far heard of players making other places, which is all fine. I mean, obviously you would use whatever advantage you could when it comes to something like this. But this is not like Michael Scott on The Office holding up a world's greatest boss coffee mug or, whatever other example of puffery that you want to give over the years. These are the kinds of claims that ought to be verified because you better believe for the rest of the SEC, there are negative repercussions on this that go far beyond just whatever it might mean for the positive for Alabama recruiting. When a player on an SEC roster hears, wait, Bryce Young's getting that kind of money? Where's my money? Why am I not cashing in like that? I think it just contributes to the general unrest that could be commonplace in college football in this era, which if it were true, if Young really is making that kind of money, there's very little you can do about that other than just get over it and move on, as Nick Saban said today at SEC Media Days. Different players are going to cash in at different levels when it comes to their name, image, and likeness. And that kind of equal playing field, unequal results is the kind of thing that most of us have been used to for the entirety of our lives. I don't think college football players are any different on that. But when the claims are inaccurate, if this one indeed turns out to be with Nick Saban, or just maybe better than saying inaccurate, probably best to say just exaggerated, right? I mean, here's the thing we know about Bryce Young. He signed a deal with Cash App. He's done a social media post on behalf of Cash App thus far. He has a deal with one of the big marketing agencies that are out there. And it could very well be that Nick Saban has had something misconstrued to him through all of this. When you sign with an agent, one of the things that agents love to do is talk about your earning potential. We believe you could make as much as, whatever number you want to put fill in the blank with. It's almost like I'll date myself the reference here, but are you old enough to remember when those envelopes used to come in the mail when I was a kid? My parents would get these all the time, and it came from Ed McMahon, it's Publishers Clearinghouse, and the headline on the front of the envelope would say, you may have already won $10 million. I sort of get the impression that whoever's repping Bryce Young has told Nick Saban, yeah, when it's all said and done, this guy may make $1 million. Well, of course you'd say that if you're the agent repping him on these deals, you want to make yourself sound like a big shot when it comes to all that kind of stuff. But for Saban to then take that, run with it, and have basically the rest of the media parrot that claim without doing really anything to verify it, and one of the big rooms that Nick Saban was in today, I listened to the entirety of the transcript, not a single person asked him one question about that. That's the kind of thing that I think the media has got to be better. You can't just get fixated on big, pretty-sounding numbers and run with this because the headline looks good. It might generate some clicks. People are going to have to verify some of this name, image, likeness news for the future and, health of college athletics, if not for the competitive balance that exists within the league. As I said before, there's nothing wrong with any of this if it happens to be true. But if it's an exaggerated claim that's not pushed back against by the people who are supposed to be checking these claims, then I feel like somebody's dropped the ball on that front somewhere along the way. As you can tell, I am live here at Hoover, Alabama for SEC Media Days. A lot of your comments coming up on both Facebook and YouTube. We'll also look back on some of the other big things that have been said around SEC Media Days this week. The showdown between Georgia and Florida continuing the SEC East. We'll talk about that. Nick Saban was involved in another controversy of a very weird sorts here over the course of 24 hours. We'll deal with some of that there today as well. A whole bunch of fun, a whole bunch of conversation. But as promised, your chatter right now about the start of SEC Media Days, the appearance by Nick Saban in Alabama today, and everything else going on with that. John Moore on the Facebook comment section says that Bryce Young's not making seven figures. Y'all fell for Saban's trap. And, I do think this is one of those things that if Saban exaggerated this and nobody called him on the exaggeration, I do think that matters. How you utilize name, image, likeness is going to benefit your recruiting success. And if we've got guys out there making unchecked claims, that's not a great look for the SEC, to be completely honest with you. Andrew Farley says, post your pay. Listen, I'm not the one bragging about making seven figures there, Andrew. I'm not the one that shot my mouth off here on this. Louis Lario saying that the Aggies are going to kill it when it comes to name, image, likeness. And we've already heard of a couple of Texas A&M players signing deals with, I guess, weekly interviews where they're going to be paid as much as $10,000 for those. To my mind, that's the highest specific cash payment I think we've heard for a player in exchange for a specific task thus far. And that's about as specific as anyone's gotten when it comes to the name, image, likeness thing, at least the best that I can see. Let's see what else is coming in here. Randy Wortman said everyone knows that Nick Saban said that to draw recruits, which is fine. I don't have a problem with Saban using his platform to generate recruits. I have a problem with Saban using an exaggerated claim as the basis for that, and the people who are supposed to be the objective media not really doing anything to verify where exactly this money that Nick Saban's talking about is coming from. That's the thing I have a little bit of an issue with. Randy Hammond's also giving you WDE, which Inquiring Minds know stands for War Damn Eagle in here. Chris Norred says, why so then schools can profit off the athlete and the athlete can be broke in school. So obviously that kind of speaks to the ongoing debate, which has even led us to the name, image, likeness era. The fact that, some people look at players which they think kind of get a raw deal. I've said before that if you really polled everybody that plays Division I college football, the overwhelming majority don't think they get a raw deal. I talk to these players. I talk to their families. They're not unhappy with the arrangement they have in college football. If anything, at the high school level, they're desperate for a chance to play at the SEC level. So some of the motivation for some of this, I think, is misguided anyway, but obviously what the commenter describes there is the reason why the name, image, likeness era is even upon us. Jimmy Williams says, what do you expect from a Georgia fan? Yeah, listen, Jimmy, I make no bones about this fact, and you should appreciate that. There are a lot of people that would sit here and do a show and try to lie to you and pretend to be something that they're not. Clearly, I do this show from the honest perspective of I love the SEC. My favorite team is Georgia. And obviously, as a Georgia fan, I don't want to see Nick Saban get recruiting advantages. I don't want to see Nick Saban win championships and have all of that. You don't have to wonder what my bias is when it comes to something like this. I don't want great things for Nick Saban in Alabama. I don't mind telling you that. And if it's Nick Saban, as he did, by the way, for the 2021 recruiting class, leaning on the fact that, hey, we're the place to come if you want to win national championships. We're the place you want to come if you want to be a first-round pick. That recruiting message delivered throughout the process leading up to National Signing Day in 2021 clearly worked. Guys like Dallas Turner and others very much responded to the prestige, that brand of what Nick Saban was selling. And someone like me, who's not an Alabama fan, There's very little I can say back in response to that. There's very little I can argue back against if Nick Saban's selling the brand of his program, the prestige of his program, all the great things that Alabama has done. That happens to be true. My only point with all of this is it's not is not to say that it's unfair for Nick Saban to say it. My only point for this is if he's saying it, someone should actually follow up on this to actually find out if it might be true. Because we've seen a similar claim. Remember the other day we heard that Master P's son, you remember the hip-hop artist from New Orleans, Master P, his son was supposedly going to make $2 million off name, image, likeness. That story showed up for one day. Everybody made a big deal about it. We haven't heard a peep about that since then. I think that lets you know about the veracity of that claim there as well, the fact that it disappeared as quickly as it did. To me, this kind of falls in sort of a similar vein here, with the exception of the ramifications that exist within SEC circles about the things that someone like Nick Saban says. Stanley Shannon checking in to say, you're just an excitement heater. That's what it sounds like to me. There's no reason to think that quarterback can't make $1 million. If he didn't say he would, he said that he could. I think that you're actually not properly describing what Nick Saban said. He didn't say that he could make up to $1 million. I believe that's what somebody may have told Nick Saban. I think Saban exaggerated the claim beyond that. Look, the whole point of name, image, likeness is you lend your name, image, likeness to a company that then uses that to increase its awareness. You know, the idea that he's going to make $7 million in secret, well, that's the exact opposite about how name, image, likeness is supposed to work. Jocelyn Steele also comes back to say if he truly is going to make seven figures, then he doesn't need to have a scholarship anymore. He can pay for his education now on his own, which is obviously the other side of the long-standing argument that's been in place about the kinds of benefits that college football players and college athletes in general are supposed to get. Boba Wesley checking on this topic there as well. We'll take a few more on this, and then we'll kind of move on and then come back to your comments before we're said and done here. Herman Buquet Sr., Herman, I hope I pronounced your name correctly, says if anyone else besides Saban had said that, they would be investigated. It's important to note, though, that a lot of the things that maybe in the past we would have thought of as improper in terms of NCAA stuff, that's actually not really the case anymore. There's very little of the stuff that maybe would have gotten you in trouble in the past that, kind of falls in those same lines right now. For instance, I know the other day, Florida coach Dan Mullen, when being told about the NIL deals that some of the Miami players, or the entirety of the Miami roster, has signed with some local business in South Florida, said, wait, is that legal? And more often than not, in this new age and era in which we live, the answer to the question of whether it's legal is going to be yes. Justin Cunningham says, do the players get a percentage off their jersey sales? I believe that Michigan has negotiated that deal. I know one of the big programs has done that. I'm being told that it is Michigan, and we could very well see other programs come, soon to do that. The honest truth is, though, if you really dive deep in these numbers, these programs don't sell quite as many of those jerseys as you think they do. I mean, they sell, some, but it's not like that's a Fortune 500 company in and of itself. Greg and Sherry Wallace say when college players become pro, college football is no more. And listen, this is where I'm going to be the old man sitting on the porch for a minute. I do have some real concerns about the start of the name, image, likeness era that we're entering into. I haven't shied away from saying that, and it makes me even more concerned the way in which most of the sports writers who are behind me right now inside that hotel have their pom-poms out cheering for this every step of the way. They want this radical change to come to the sport, but I haven't been convinced yet that these kinds of radical changes in and of themselves are actually good for college sports, even if the players, justifiably ought to be able to make money off their image. I think the landscape of college sports, how it will be impacted by this, unintended consequences are a real thing, and at some point in time, we may see some of that show up here for college football. All right, let's get a couple more. And then we'll go over to YouTube there as well. Oh, by the way, Randy Hammond's also reminding us that Bo Nix has his sweet tea endorsement deal. All of a sudden, with Saban throwing around the big terms that he's throwing out, all of a sudden, Bo Nix representing a sweet tea company, all of a sudden doesn't seem quite as prolific anymore as maybe it once did. A couple more YouTube comments, and then we'll move on. We'll talk some Georgia, Florida here. Blake Robinson, an Auburn fan on YouTube, checking in to say, he says that he thinks the haves will continue to have and the have-nots will continue to be the same way. And, yeah, I, for the most part, kind of agree. For anybody who thinks that the pecking order within the hierarchy of college football is going to be greatly changed because of name, image, likeness. I think for the most part that's not true. And if you want to keep this to the boundaries of, is an Alabama quarterback likely to make more money at a place like Alabama than he would somewhere else, that very well might be true. The issue for me here is not, is it generally true that someone like Bryce Young can make money as the Alabama quarterback? I think that's fairly obvious. I think the number that Saban put out yesterday of approaching 7 figures is completely ludicrous, and I think the fact that no one has called him on that yet is a little bit embarrassing. A couple of more comments here just for a moment. Memphis Dog also weighing in to reflect what some of the Facebook commenters have said there as well, that this feels like the end of amateur sports. And when it comes to young athletes, young talent, think about the NBA G League for a moment. Think about minor league baseball for a moment. There have been a lot of sports entities that have tried to cash in on young talent ahead of their full blossoming as true pros. And for the most part, these are failed businesses. Minor league baseball is contracting. There are 60 fewer minor league baseball teams right now than there were just 2 years ago. The G League, for the most part, is a non-existent thing in terms of the actual sporting landscape in America. We've seen spring football leagues that could potentially be a target for the kinds of players that are playing in the SEC right now to forego college just to go get paid as pros right away. These leagues can't even find a way to finish a full season. So right now it would seem that in America, the only thing that the American sports fan is willing to shill out big money for when it comes to young athletes is amateur sports like college athletics. These young athletes as young, well-paid pros, that just doesn't seem to work in the grand scheme of things with the American sporting public. You can say that is unfair, but frankly, I'm not here to tell you and deliberate between fairness or not. I'm here to tell you what is, and that is what is. All right, a couple of more comments. Jay Shipes mentioning that I'll tell you a quick story here. So Jay is one of my regular commenters on my other show, Dog Nation Daily, and he gives me grief because I've talked up Texas A&M a little bit this offseason. So a couple of minutes ago, like where I'm sitting right now, if you look behind me, just behind me, there's the hotel. We're kind of walking back and forth, getting the show kind of set up here. And as I was walking back in towards the hotel lobby, I almost ran smack dab into Jimbo Fisher, who's here to, he was signing some autographs before he goes to do his tour of the big media rooms for SEC Media Days. I came this close to like doing a little selfie with a Jimbo, just for some of those dog fans like Jay Shipes who say I talk too much about Jimbo Fisher, to give them a little taste of their own medicine there. By the way, Jimbo may have he was having a good time, enjoying his time with the fans and everything else. That was a good thing to be able to do all the way around there. So we'll take more of your comments on this topic here in SEC Country Live here today. I do want to move on now, though. That was above the fold, our big topic around the SEC. I want to look at some of the other topics around the league right now. And I thought that Florida coach Dan Mullen made a very interesting appearance at SEC Media Days when he was here to start the week on Monday. And one of the things that Mullen said that kind of got some attention was when asked about whether he was bothered by the fact that no one was picking Florida, at least in the eyes of the questioner. No one was picking Florida to win the SEC East. I'll show you Edgar Thompson's tweet here. Thompson, of course, covers the Florida Gators for the Orlando Sentinel. And Mullen, you can see the screen. I actually can't see the screen in front of me. But he says something to the effect of that doesn't bother him at all because that's essentially the way in which it was all handled a year ago. That what Dan Mullen's basically insinuating there is he's grown used to having no one pick the Florida Gators. And this is one of those moments where, much the same way I felt like no one was fact-checking Nick Saban's specious claim off the top of the program, this is where I feel like I have to step in and do a little fact-checking here based on what Mullen erroneously claimed on Monday. The idea that nobody was picking Florida to win the SEC East a year ago, and it's no different now that no one's doing the same thing in Mullen's eyes in 2021. I want to go back in time just for a brief moment to some of the stuff that was being said this time a year ago by well-known voices for CBS, the SEC Network, ESPN, about their belief that last year truly was Florida's moment to shine, moment to step up in the SEC East. Dan Mullen says no one was picking us a year ago. Here's the actual truth of what was being said about Florida this time 12 months ago. Take a quick listen to this.
I think Florida's definitely a contender this year.
The Florida Gators are the team to beat in the SEC East.
I look at Florida and I go, it's got to be now.
Kyle Trask, possibly the best quarterback in the league.
They've got an outstanding quarterback in Kyle Trask, who not enough people talked about this past season and the success he had with Dan Mullen.
This has got to be Florida's year because of Kyle Trask, his development.
The defense is going to be stout, particularly in the secondary.
Florida's going to be better defensively. They have one of the best defensive coordinators
All right,
in
so
the
good stuff
country.
there from
I
Dan
think
Mullen
Florida's in a
talking
prime
about,
position
or
to
should
get
say,
back to Atlanta in
interesting stuff
2020.
there as refuting what Dan Mullen was saying there about no one picking them to win the SEC East. Pretty clearly, you heard Chris Doering, you heard Danny Cannell, all kinds of voices saying, no, that's indeed what was going on, that yes, lots of folks were picking Florida to win the SEC East. But I think it really sets up, though, one of the more interesting battles that's ongoing in the SEC right now. And we actually talked about this on this show a couple of weeks ago, whether it be Bill Bender from the Sporting News who's made this claim, or Paul Feinbaum, the voice you obviously hear on the SEC network, that when it comes to rivalries and the stature of the SEC rivalries that seem to be growing the quickest, I don't think there's any doubt that Georgia-Florida, on the basis of some of the things that you've heard on this show over the course of the last couple of months, that's one that's getting there. Mullen trying to play coy, trying to, hide in the weeds here as a team that supposedly nobody believes in for this upcoming year, when actually the Florida Gators approach the upcoming season with the target on their back of knowing they are the defending champions in this division. Now, yes, this was also a Florida team that lost its final 3 games from a year ago, and there's some frustration around that. But they got the win against Georgia. They got the trip to the SEC championship game. They gave the Alabama Crimson Tide a good game while they were there in Atlanta, and that's the kind of thing that the other half of this rivalry, the Georgia Bulldogs, have to consider. And I thought you got a very candid moment from Kirby Smart when he spoke to reporters on Tuesday, but the way that motivates Georgia, knowing that, yes, indeed, something that Georgia had done in 2017, 2018, 2019, win the SEC East, go to the SEC championship. Georgia didn't get a chance to play for that a year ago. The loss to Florida prevented that from taking place, and that's something that's Kirby Smart says remains on the minds of the Georgia coaches and players as they head towards the upcoming season. Here's Kirby Smart on that.
You can never have enough good tight ends in the SEC because they're big, they're athletic, they can catch the ball. There's so many things they can do. So it's one of those things that we want as many as we can get, and we want to get them the ball.
So that's Kirby Smart talking about the way in which, that loss to Florida a year ago kind of lives with UGA. And it's one of the reasons why I think that game, in the eyes of so many people, has grown to be as high a stakes game as we have in the SEC right now. Feinbaum himself, he made an appearance on WJOX, a sports radio station in Birmingham, a couple of months ago, talking about how when he wanted to generate calls in the past, you talk Iron Bowl, you talk Alabama, you talk Auburn. What Feinbaum has said recently, though, is no, if you want to get those folks stirred up right now, you start talking Georgia-Florida. You let the Georgia fans, the Florida fans go side by side against each other, and that rivalry has really grown in stature here right now. And obviously I think it's one of the things that makes the SEC great. One of the reasons why, even in kind of a stripped-down year like this, for the most part, SEC Media Days is a smaller event this year than it's been in the past. Of course, last year it didn't exist at all, but there are fewer media here. There's certainly fewer fans here than have been here in the past. But one of the things that makes this event so big, as a representation of what makes this league so big, are the rivalries like this that really matter. And I would say in the Georgia-Florida situation there that Mullen talked about, that Smart talked about here this week, I would say there's pressure on both coaches, right? I mean, it's a very interesting scenario that Mullen faces to come into the upcoming year, knowing that what was supposed to be his crowning achievement thus far in his Florida tenure, the breakthrough season that allowed the Gators to play for the SEC championship for the first time since 2016, actually can't really be celebrated and sold that way because of how the season ended. The 3 straight losses to close it out, the embarrassing home loss against LSU that included the thrown shoe, the Oklahoma Bowl loss in blowout fashion that Dan Mullen didn't exactly cover himself in glory in when it comes to his post-game comments there on that the significant tangible accomplishment of winning the SEC East, of getting that win against Georgia, the first one that Dan Mullen had scored against Kirby Smart head-to-head in his coaching career, in Smart's tenure as a head coach, that you don't have a chance to maybe sell that quite as much as you might want, just simply on the basis of the fact of the way that season ended for Florida a year ago. And then on the Georgia side of this, there's also the interesting scenario of there are a lot of Georgia fans that'll tell you, well, the game against Florida, mitigating factors, there's injuries, JT Daniels wasn't ready to play yet. Daniels would play and begin his Georgia career the following game for Georgia against Mississippi State. And all of that should be understood in context when it comes to the loss against Florida. Now, this is where I'm going to once again be very honest and say, yes, I'm a Georgia fan, and yes, I love nothing more than seeing Georgia beat Florida. But this is one of those where I can't, if that's what some Georgia fans are saying, that's not a statement I can make. I can't excuse away what happened to Florida a year ago. The fact is, Georgia had a stranglehold on this rivalry known as the world's largest outdoor cocktail party and let some of that slip away last year. For whatever reason it happened, it still happened. The result counts. It matters. Pandemic year or not, injuries or not, smaller, reduced crowd or not, that was a big win for Florida against Georgia last year. And I think there are a lot of Georgia fans because, frankly, most of the media will not pick Florida to win the SEC East or beat Georgia this year. I think there's a lot of media folks who sort of assume, or I should say a lot of fans who sort of assume, well, Georgia's just going to skate back into Jacksonville in October. They'll win that game. Everything will be fine. There'll be nothing left to worry about there. But I think that for the Georgia fans who feel that way, I think you ought to pay attention to the other stuff that Mullen said here this week. Mullen spoke with a lot of confidence, and if you want to go back to previous editions of our show, think about when we were talking back in early April, late March, at the conclusion of Florida spring practice, when Mullen was slow to praise Emory Jones. At the time, his quarterback, talking about wanting to have two quarterbacks ready to start, basically sidestepping the chance to proclaim Jones as his starter at that moment. I thought when Dan Mullen spoke about Jones here this week at SEC Media Days, I thought he spoke with a lot more confidence in regards to what he thinks that Jones brings to the table. Maybe that matters. Maybe it doesn't. Maybe that's just a seeming semantic difference and not an actual, real, tangible difference. But it was hard not to notice that Georgia right now, if you look ahead to the early Vegas lines, things like that, feels like a fairly substantial favorite against Florida. But certainly Mullen this week spoke with some confidence as the kind of coach who feels like he may once again have the kind of team that could win in that game, win in the SEC East Division, and who knows what could possibly happen after that. We'll get more of your comments coming up on that in a moment. Before that, though, here on SEC Country Live from Hoover, Alabama, SEC Media Days, let's keep our all-points bulletin going here and check in on some of the other SEC news. I thought you had a very candid moment or two from LSU coach Ed Orgeron when he spoke here this week about all of the unrest that's gone on with LSU over the course of the last 12 months. The off-field stuff, admittedly, Orgeron wasn't in a mood to discuss. When it comes to on-field issues, Orgeron a little bit more willing to take some of those head on, including the interesting follow-up to things he said before about hiring certain coaches without having a chance to interview them, including the failed defensive coordinator from a year ago, Bo Pelini. I'll show you this tweet on the screen from Brooks Cabina, who covers LSU, who was able to kind of capture Orgeron in his own words on that, saying that there was no formal interview in place when it comes to the hiring of Pelini, but even if they had, he believes he would have still hired Bo Pelini. And this is one of those moments that kind of speaks to what I've said about Orgeron before. I'm actually a fairly big believer in Orgeron as a coach. Now, if you want to go back and listen to way older shows of this back in 2017, I guess I probably bought into the caricature that a lot of folks maybe assume is the real version of Orgeron. Almost the cartoon, the funny voice, the talk about gumbo and the very, real Louisiana style that he seems to bring to the table. That's kind of what I thought Orgeron was all about. I think in the intervening moments since then, I think Orgeron's proven himself to be a real coach. Even in 2018, prior to the national championship, he gets the big win against Georgia, gets a bowl win against UCF back when that kind of mattered. Orgeron proved a lot of things in SEC games, and then 2019 obviously has the huge breakthrough. I think he's proven himself as a coach, and I think after a pretty ugly 2020 season, I think Orgeron's likely to bounce back in a big way here right now as well. But one of the things you do want to see more from Orgeron, there are just some rough edges that have to be cleared up. We talked last week about Dare Rosenthal, the offensive lineman who ends up at Kentucky, and you've got Sidney Charles talking on social media about some of the things that might have gone on there. The whatever may have happened with Bo Pelini, hire without being interviewed, and Mullen, should say, Orgeron having to go back and clean some of that kind of stuff up. There's just a little bit of almost a disorganization that seems to exist around Orgeron that you'd like to see cleared up. It's one of the reasons why it becomes easy for some to tab him as the kind of coach that can have great success as long as he's got a real sharp, polished guy like Dave Aranda as his defensive coordinator or Joe Brady as his passing game coordinator. I think Ed Orgeron's a better coach than some people give him credit for. but some of the sloppiness that exists around the LSU program makes it a little bit easier for some to tab him as less than maybe what he might be. We'll keep the conversation going here in SEC Media Days from Hoover, Alabama, where the actual event itself is ongoing behind me right now. I'm sitting out here. The clouds, by the way, are looking a little dark around me, so hopefully we're not going to get hit with some rain. If you see me take off running and cut off on the show, that means that the weather got here. But the best that I can tell, it seems like things might be fine, and I want to continue our conversation here because a lot has happened of a very interesting variety at SEC Media Days this week. I want to focus in for a moment on some of those coaches who made their SEC Media Days debuts thus far this week. We've seen second-year coaches like Lane Kiffin and Mike Leach who didn't have a chance to be a part of this event last year because there was no SEC Media Days. They've had a chance to impress thus far this week, and I would say that, varying opinions about how well that went. We've also seen some of the first-year coaches, brand new hires. We haven't seen yet Brian Harsin yet from Auburn. He'll be here tomorrow, but we have seen Clark Lee from Vanderbilt. We have seen Josh Heupel from Tennessee. We have seen Shane Beamer from South Carolina. And one of the things I'd like to take some comments from some of you about, we'll take some more of these comments here in a moment, is which of the first-year coaches that you thought was the most impressive getting a chance to speak in front of the media. Frankly, Clark Lee is not the kind of person that I think casts much of a shadow right now. So for the most part, his appearance really left me feeling nothing. And I would say that most folks probably feel the same way when it comes to Vanderbilt football on that. I thought Josh Heupel probably missed the moment a bit. Heupel's one of those guys that even though he's got head coaching experience, when you see him there, orange tie, dark-colored suit, I don't know that he quite looks like the experienced head coach the way that some of these guys have a way of standing at that podium, looking at the cameras, speaking to the microphone. And I would say that some of these guys really do come across as quite presidential when they're doing that. I thought Heupel was a little less than that when he had a chance to speak yesterday. And for a coach that's going to have to sell that Tennessee program, who's going to have to, as we talked about a couple of weeks ago, generate some fun, get folks excited about the Vols again, try to score some points, even if you lose in a pretty fashion, I thought that Heupel certainly missed that opportunity to do that when he spoke at SEC Media Days this week. Conversely, maybe the opposite of that a bit when it comes to South Carolina coach Shane Beamer, who, stepping into this new job with the Gamecocks, I was kind of wondering, how would he try to sell himself? He's not a guy who's been a head coach before. He's not a guy who's even been a coordinator before. He's a guy who's worked with Lincoln Riley, who worked with Kirby Smart, who has a famous dad in Frank Beamer. But you got to have more than just, what almost some people might describe as a degree of nepotism. You've got to have something more than that to sell yourself to SEC fans, to sell yourself to Gamecocks fans in particular. Well, I think the thing that really made Beamer one of the big winners of this week is the fact that what Beamer's putting on display is his affection for the South Carolina Gamecocks. He may not be an alumnus of the program the way that someone like Sam Pittman might be for Arkansas, or Ed Orgeron, as a Louisiana native might, have that affection for LSU. You may not have that same, depth within the state, but Beamer has worked in Columbia with the Gamecocks before, and he came across as a very effective salesman and spokesman for why South Carolina should not lag behind anybody in the SEC. I don't know that many of you believe that. I personally don't believe that. But it was pretty clear yesterday that Beamer himself believes that he actually loves Columbia. And there's no better way to ingratiate yourself to Gamecocks fans than to put on display a love for South Carolina that's just as intense as theirs is. You may have seen the photo. I showed this on my other show, Dog Nation Daily, earlier this week, of Beamer even recreating the iconic photo of Steve Spurrier, where Spurrier was at the fast food restaurant at the end of SEC Media Days, tie undone, shades on, suit on, getting a drink from the soda fountain. And Beamer did a great job of recreating that photo, and it just shows, even if someone told him he should do it, it shows an appreciation that Beamer has for what South Carolina football has been, and I think an appreciation for the past, I think, sets you up well for the future. The other thing that I thought Beamer did a really good job of was using the podium as a way of furthering South Carolina's recruiting efforts. For those of you that follow recruiting, you'll know that one of the recruiting battles that the Gamecocks are attempting to wage right now is for four-star tight end out of Georgia, Oscar Delp. Delp's got an upcoming visit to Clemson. Delp has been closely connected to Georgia because a lot of Delp's friends and associates are already UGA commits, or at least high-profile UGA targets. But there's a family tie for Delp to South Carolina as well. That's a tie that the Gamecocks are trying to exploit. that's something that South Carolina feels like it can work to its advantage. And most people took a statement that Beamer made during SEC Media Days to be a direct pitch to Delp. Now, you can't mention a prospective recruit by name, but there's a campaign happening around South Carolina of "We want Delp." You've seen that on signs. South Carolina fans have been putting that out there on social media. There's been a lot of that. And when Beamer talked about his desire to use the tight ends in Columbia, he certainly accentuated the phrase "we want" in one of his statements from this past week. Take a listen to this, see if you notice it for yourself, but also listen to the way in which Beamer talks about the Gamecocks, his desire for the program. He certainly comes across as someone far more experienced than someone who is still yet to coach his first game, this Shane Beamer from earlier this week.
Tight end position, that's a position that's near and dear to me, something that I've coached for the last 5 years in my career. We are always going to utilize the tight end. Every donor or booster club event that I go to, that's the one question I get asked: are you going to throw the tight end? We are going to throw to the tight end. We want the premier tight ends in America, and that's the way that we're recruiting right now as well, to go get those guys as well. We've utilized those guys in the past when I've been at Oklahoma, and we will continue to. One of those tight ends is here today in Nick Muse, a fantastic older player for us, and then Jaheim Bell is another one that we have high hopes for as well. But that position will always be a key part of our offense at South Carolina.
So that is Shane Beamer there talking about Oscar, or at least what most people assume was about Oscar Delp, the four-star tight end, but also demonstrating the poise and the demeanor that he put on display at SEC Media Days when he met the media on Monday. So I'd love to hear your thoughts about which of the first-year SEC coaches, or even if you want to include some of the second-year SEC coaches making their first appearance at their current job with their current school. If you want to talk about how they fared at SEC Media Days, give you a chance to hear that there as well. We'll also dive into the controversy involving Nick Saban that Deion Sanders dragged Saban into. We'll do some of that before we're done there as well. A few of your comments here for now before we get there, though. Let me go YouTube, then Facebook, and then we'll do a little bit more SEC news here in just a moment. Jay Shipes not happy with the message that Shane Beamer shared a little earlier over here. Pretty interesting stuff there. Memphis Dog on the subject of Josh Heupel saying that Heupel failed to keep Tennessee's best players from leaving, and that's one of the issues, is that it is such a diminished roster for Tennessee right now, even with the addition of Brandon Turnage, who at one point in time was leaving Alabama. Some thought he might be coming to Georgia, ends up going to Tennessee instead. Even with the addition of a former four-star recruit from the Alabama roster, this is still a fairly depleted Tennessee roster right now, and that is one of the biggest issues that Josh Heupel has in front of him. Mike D. on the subject of the various comment sections says the Facebook is for cupcakes. It's too soft over there. You got to have thick skin to be on YouTube. And at least for the most part, that's the way our comment sections go. It certainly seems like there's plenty of fisticuffs and elbows being thrown when it comes to that YouTube comment section for sure, all the way around on that. Memphis Dog says he notices that I'm standing closer to the TAMU flag, the Texas A&M flag behind us. Yeah, all of the various flags. You can't quite see this. It's just above your field of vision because I am sitting down. But the big, almost like Vegas-style resort SEC just means more sign is just ahead of us here. That's pretty good stuff all the way around. Good comments rolling in here on Facebook. Marcus Reddick reaching out to say, knowing what I know about Alabama and the Bryant Bank, wouldn't surprise me if that money wasn't put up by the Bryant Bank for Bryce Young. Obviously, no way to assume that's true, but Marcus weighing in on that. A lot of folks weighing in there as well. Corey Halterman says, I sound like a Bama hater, saying it's hard to acknowledge that Bama isn't the standard. This is going back to the very beginning of the show when we talked about Bryce Young and the claim by Nick Saban that Young is approaching 7 figures in NIL money. No one's going to deny, not even me, who obviously is not an Alabama fan, no one's going to deny that Alabama is the standard in the SEC. But that doesn't, absolve Nick Saban from the responsibility of telling the truth when he speaks about what's going on with his team, Bryce Young and his NIL money included. And if Nick Saban's going to make an exaggerated claim, the hope here would be that someone in the reporter class would step up and maybe verify that, fact check that. After all, it seems like that's what should be going on in a situation like that. Jim Landon McWhirter calls me a goober. Jim, appreciate you checking in the show nonetheless. Michael Stepp on the subject of Kodak Black, who is a big Florida fan. And we're actually going to talk some hip-hop before we're done on the show today, believe it or not, because that became a topic on SEC Media Days there as well. Here's the sense I'm starting to get. And for Michael Carvel, who's my on-site producer back in our friendly confines in Atlanta, we're going to probably pick up the pace here a little bit because, boy, the skies are getting just a little bit darker, and I don't want this camera to get rained on. So let me kind of roll with this here a little bit. I was going to talk Dabo Swinney, his thoughts on the 12-team playoff. Let me move off that for right now because the honest truth is we'll have more time to talk about that. The big news around here over the course of the last 24 hours has been what's gone on with Deion Sanders at SWAC Media Days. SWAC is the Southwestern Athletic Conference. That's where Sanders is currently employed as the head coach of Jackson State. There was an exchange with a reporter during SWAC Media Days in which Sanders, as you're about to hear, and by now you probably heard some version of this, was called Deion by his first name. Sanders was not too happy about that, saying that this is not the way that Nick Saban would be treated. And on the heels of that, I also have tagged on Nick Saban being asked about that very topic here today at SEC Media Days. This has been a huge conversation, huge talking point. Obviously, there's nothing reporters like talking about more than themselves, their own job process, and this is the latest example of that. So here is the question, the response by Deion Sanders, and then Nick Saban being asked of, is it really a problem for you to be called Nick? This all over the course of the last 24 hours. Take a listen to this. Here is a part of SEC Country Live. Maybe we don't have the Deion Saban thing. Do we not have that? So maybe we don't. So I guess the bottom line on all of this is that Deion Sanders didn't like being called Deion. He said that Nick Saban would not be called that way. Nick Saban today said that he didn't have a problem being called Nick. He said he didn't have a problem being called almost anything. And yeah, it's one of those things where, you know, look, I think that Deion Sanders has cultivated too much drama as his time at Jackson State coach. If you want to be a great coach, you have to avoid drama. You don't need to seek it. I think that Sanders has sought it too frequently. I also don't think the reporter in that particular case, who I guess full disclosure, I should acknowledge, former colleague of mine at SEC Country in the past, I don't think the reporter here necessarily behaved in the way that I'd certainly behave myself in a situation like that. If Sanders wanted to be called coach, I guess I'd just call him what he wanted to be called, even if I didn't really feel like I was obliged to do so. I think there's such a thing as human courtesy, and I think the reporter was lacking in courtesy. I think that Sanders was kind of maybe seeking a confrontation where that was kind of unnecessary all the way around. The other thing I'll say here kind of in response to this is, you know, it's one thing for Nick Saban to not want to be called coach or not care about that. He's obviously well established as a coach. Everyone knows he is a coach. He's been a coach since almost before I was born. It certainly seems that way anyway. Deion Sanders, though, is very young in his coaching career, and a lot of people, because Sanders was such a prominent player, they may still think of Deion as a player, and he's having to work hard to brand himself now as a coach. So if for that reason, if Sanders wants to be called coach, to me that's at least a practical reason why that might be true. Does that obligate someone who's not his player to then call him coach? Probably not, but as common courtesy, common decency, calling Sanders what he wants to be called, and not being quite so obstinate about that on the other side, I guess that's probably the way that I would have handled that in that particular situation. But nonetheless, a very interesting squabble here over the course of the last 24 hours, which gives the media a chance to talk about itself, which is always its favorite topic, to be sure. All right, I am running late here. I'm not running late, but I think I'm going to have to get off the air in a second because I believe it's about to rain. So we're actually going to go off the air a little bit early before we do. Sorry for the lack of the rest of your comments, but it's going to storm here very, 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 very soon. So we're going to wrap things up, get back to Atlanta. Let me give you a lighthearted note to close this out on. Our SEC LOL, great way to do that. Somebody mentioned Kodak Black in our comment section earlier. Famous hip-hop artist who has a connection to an SEC school, Kodak, a big Florida fan. Also, this week it came up, and I'll show you this on the screen, of Quavo and Kirby Smart together. Georgia fan Bassin Dog sharing this on social media, echoing what had been talked about a lot this week. Kirby saying that he and Quavo text each other. Georgia nose guard Jordan Davis say they may text with each other, but I'm not quite so sure Kirby knows a Quavo song, Amigo song. That's what Jordan Davis had said a little earlier this week. And when Smart was asked a question about that during media days this week, was very deft in his ability to kind of sidestep that. We may never quite find out if Smart truly does know a Migos song, how much of Quavo's music he indeed knows, but it seems fairly obvious that he and Quavo generally are genuine friends, and so I guess another connection to a pretty well-known celebrity in SEC circles. It seems like there's a lot more of that with each passing year. That's our SEC LOL. All right, sorry for jumping off the air a little quick here and kind of going hurry up, no huddle with the final few minutes of the show, but we got to go before it rains. So y'all get ready to enjoy the rest of SEC Media Days. I'll be back next Wednesday. And by the next time we all speak together, we're getting very close to the start of the season. Practice is essentially beginning all around the SEC. We'll be covering them for you every Wednesday, 3 p.m. Eastern Time for SEC Country Live. You'll have a great week. I will see you again next week. I'm about to run and try to get dry. We'll talk to you then, everybody.